Everyone has heard Craigslist horror stories, but last night I experienced one firsthand. For about a week I had been speaking to a guy regarding a laptop I wanted to buy. After a slew of cancellations due to family issues, he eventually gave me an address that checked out on Google Maps. The day before, we organized a pickup spot. On arrival at the address, he said to give him a call, but wouldn't give me an apartment number. I was given some extremely vague directions in broken English, and eventually an apartment number that didn't exist in that complex. My alarm bell started ringing, and I made my way back to my car. From across the road, a figure appeared. He was head to toe in black, with the balaclava on. To my horror, in his left hand, he had a machete that went from his knee to his foot. I remember him saying, "Hey buddy, give me the money." That was all he said. Panicking, I started backpedaling down the road, and luckily a bus came around the corner. I flagged it down, screaming for help. However, the bus driver wouldn't stop to let me on. At this point, I thought this was it. Luckily for me, there was another car driving up, which I managed to scramble to. Obviously, I shocked them when they simply put their windows up, signaled to the bus which had stopped, maybe realizing that something was up. The driver finally let me on, and people moved to the back of the bus, obviously thinking I was some crazed lunatic. No one offered me any help, and crying my eyes out, clearly distressed, I dialed 911. I was picked up at production station by the police and driven back to the scene, where there was a number of dog units on hand. This process took 15 minutes, so the guy was long gone. During this whole time, the guy was still texting me, asking where I was. I have received a number of calls since. There are too many coincidences for it to seem like an opportunist thief hanging out in the bushes that just so happened to try to mug a guy that was just buying a laptop. I was asked via text, "What color car are you driving? And what color jacket are you wearing?" And the whole "meet me on a pathway near a unit that doesn't exist" is also suspect. I know I'm going to receive the usual "how could you be so stupid" comments, but I just wanted to share the experience on the off chance anyone had the same thing happen to them. I use Craigslist a lot to buy and sell. I never in my wildest imagination thought that this would happen to me, and the fact that I still don't know if it was a setup or not still really bugs me. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that there was something a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a "thanks." I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to go see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. I was creeped out. The whole night she had been saying I look more like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what she could possibly be doing. Occasionally she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words. So I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Oh, hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth, over and over and over again. And every time she turned to bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. It doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie. That was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up, she was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his throat out." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger and everything I'd seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and she started to do her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in a house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I could not fall back asleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms, and all I could think about her was saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember anything. She doesn't remember trying to push my door open. She doesn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond. I never heard from her again. I always wondered if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? The thought of it just freaks me out. My girlfriend and I have been dating for about 3 months, and things are, I would say, progressing very well. She's a bit older than me and makes really good money, so she lives in an upper class area of the city and rents out a mother-in-law apartment. It's a small 1x1 and has some minor kinks, but it's in a prime area of the city and just about everything is 5 minutes away. The houses in this area are as old as the city, so there's a lot of history with some of these homes. On our first date, she was telling me a story on how she found the apartment. She was looking through Craigslist and found a bunch of mother-in-laws in that area, and she narrowed it down to about 5 she was really interested in. Just moving down from Boston, she wasn't too concerned about size or age of the place. Before, she lived in a small old apartment for about 2 years. When she arrived to tour the apartment, the one she is living in now, one of the owners was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. It's one of the older homes in the areas. The lawn wasn't kept, and there were vines growing on all sides of the house. The owners are an old married couple who have been living there for 50 years. At first, she was a bit creeped out by them, but once she got to know them, she felt very comfortable and felt very relaxed. Eventually, they took her around the side to an alley which had a driveway that led up to the apartment. It was a garage at one point that they converted into a mother-in-law a few years back to collect some extra money. They entered the apartment and was greeted by all the furniture left by the last tenant. The couple told her that the previous man that lived here just left one day and never came back, but left all of his possessions there. The sunlight was pouring in from all sides of the apartment. One thing my girlfriend noticed was that the blinds and curtains that once covered the windows were ripped down from the walls. The couple was telling her that something was bothering the last tenant the last few days that they saw him, and that he was acting a bit odd. Thinking nothing of it, my girlfriend liked the place a lot, and got a great deal on the place and decided to move in. We started dating about 4 or 5 months after she moved down here. The first time I went to her place, she was still receiving boxes from the move up north. There were a lot of random items thrown about. That night, I ended up staying at her place. From her bed, she doesn't shut her bedroom door, and from there you can see the kitchen, where there's a small window on the far wall. And on the outside of the wall is the AC condenser, and when the AC is on, the air blows the trees above, which gives off an eerie shadow movement through the kitchen. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that all of her framed photos had been flipped face down on the shelves in her room. I was immediately alarmed and looked over to see that she was still sleeping next to me. A few weeks later, I was picking her up to go to a bar with some friends of ours and noticed something very odd. The owner's house is covered in vines, but only on 3 sides. The side facing the back of the apartment was clear. In fact, all the plants on that side of the house were dead. At that point, I felt something very odd about this place that she was living in, especially since the owners have no idea what happened to the previous tenant. Later that night, we walked home after a night of heavy drinking and immediately went to bed. Before I fell asleep, I peered off into the kitchen. The clock on the oven flashes the time, so the kitchen is a faint green hue for a second and then goes dark. The trees outside are swaying in the wind. I eventually pass out, awake again in the middle of the night to use the restroom, when suddenly I heard a loud thump. I looked towards the kitchen and saw the outline of someone standing in the doorway between that and the living room. I freaked, but before I could move, the next flash of green light from the oven revealed nothing. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but there was no way I was going to move from that bed. I looked over at my girlfriend, still sound asleep. The next morning when I got up to use the restroom, I noticed that again all of her frames were flipped down. Last week I went to her place after work to have dinner and watch a movie. We both had a long day and were very tired. At about 10 p.m. I received a phone call from an unknown number. I didn't answer it, and about a minute later my phone lit up again with the voicemail from the unknown caller, but there was nothing there but a static sound. About 5 minutes later, same thing, unknown number and the same static sounding message. This happened again and again to where eventually I turned my phone off. At this point, the apartment she was living in was starting to freak me out, but I never told my girlfriend about it. She liked it a lot and shrugged off the frames falling. She took them down about a week before and framed a large montage of all her photos and hung it over her bed. That night, I woke up to use the restroom again and noticed that my girlfriend was sitting at the end of the bed facing the other direction. Her arm was extended out, holding onto the velvet curtains that covered the windows. I started rubbing her back and asked if everything was okay. She didn't say anything, so I laid back down to stretch out my back and rolled over to see my girlfriend still lying next to me, asleep. I looked like a kid on Christmas morning leaping out of that bed. When I turned the lights on, there was nothing there. My girlfriend woke up and looked at me like I was nuts. The curtains were still moving and looked as though they were trying to be pulled down. I sat on the floor breathing heavily and started to sweat on my brow. Then I saw something I didn't want to see, sticking slightly out from the end of the bed. And then I hear my girlfriend say, "Where's my picture frame?" I haven't been to her place since. I don't believe in ghosts or the afterlife or anything in that nature. I love horror movies and haunted houses, but never have I ever been so freaked out in my life. I told her what I've been seeing and she believes me. She talked to the owner about what happened and it started to seem clear to me. The guy before must have witnessed something himself and got out of there. The owners told her she can move out if she wants to, and she's currently looking for another place.
Like a bird on a tree,